Hey, yo, what's going on, everyone? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com. We are cruising right into week 9 of the college football season. Another edition of Alabama SEC Insider for you, brought to you by Keep Alabama Beautiful. And Alabama gets another win in the books against Tennessee, 52-24. We're going to light them up once again. That's 15 in a row for the Alabama Crimson Tide against Tennessee. Mike Rodak in to talk about it. He was there at the game. He experienced, he witnessed it all. He did it all. He was part of the whole show, everything that there was to
Sort of.
see with this Alabama football game. I know, I guess part of the whole show, but maybe you weren't
I wasn't
participating
out
in
there
the
playing. I can assure you of that.
out there playing. You were not participating in the cigar smoking afterwards either, I assume. You
Correct.
were
Yeah. Witnessed
probably
it
up in the
all.
press box,
Hmm.
frantically working, trying to get all of our viewers out there up to speed, up to date on everything that had happened and everything that was said after the game. So let's just start there. Alabama, faced one loss earlier in the season against Texas A&M. They bounced back, and here we are now in week 9 as they get ready for their bye week, and they get a big win against Tennessee, a Tennessee team that you cannot roll over on, that showed some glimmers of hope and some light and some, I don't know what you want to call it, but just give us your initial thoughts on the game, the matchup, and how Alabama competed against this year's Tennessee team.
Yeah, this year's Tennessee team, I think, is a little bit better than what we've seen the last few years, at least. Under Pruitt, I think they were a little bit. They're probably the worst team that Alabama plays in a certain stretch of time. Like it was always you played Arkansas when they were rough, you played Tennessee when they were rough, you played Ole Miss when they were rough, and now it's a little bit different. Where this middle of the season, Ole Miss is pretty good. In fact, they're a top 10 team now. Arkansas is better, and Tennessee's better too. And I think that was kind of the message going into the game with Saban, where with their offense, since it's up tempo and you have some explosive ability there. It was going to be a little bit more of a challenge than maybe we've seen in the past, and I think it was. Now, with that said, Alabama still is a much better team, and I think if they were playing up to their capability for the full 60 minutes, then the score would have been different, or at least the score during the game would have been different, because it was a weird game where you look at the final and it was 28-point difference. They covered the spread. It was an easy win on the scoreboard by the end, but we all know it really wasn't. I mean, they were down by 7 points early in the game, and that was the first time that they've been trailing Tennessee in 6 years. The first time it was the largest deficit they've had at home against Tennessee in 18 years, going back to 2003. So, again, part of that is Tennessee's a little bit better, but I think part of it was Alabama just was a little bit worse than they have been the last couple of years, and it all kind of mixed together for a game that was probably a little bit more interesting than we were all expecting.
Yeah, and so just kind of going off of that, of course, Paul Crew here weighing in. 28-point win is a survival situation judged by a different standard. Bama played their C game, need to clean that up down the stretch. That won't cut it against Auburn. So that's his take on things there, Paul. Thanks for weighing in on that. So, yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question for you. Let's get a midseason report card, the good and the bad, best of, worst of. If we talk about that and, some of the inconsistencies and things that you're highlighting. So at this point in the season, as we get ready for the back half of the season, what do you think Alabama does really well that you want to highlight?
That's a good question, because it kind of changes every week. That's kind of the mystery about this
Yeah.
team, where you go in. I mean, look at the Ole Miss game and the way they played defense in that game, and a game that everybody thought was going to be really challenging offensively. And then you go out the next week and they give up all that they did to Zach Calzada. And then you go into the next game and you shut down Mississippi State, and you have all these explosive plays on offense that had been missing the first 6 games of the season. Then you go into Tennessee, and even within the Tennessee game, 3 and out in the first drive, easy touchdown drive the second time. Then you have this string of 6 3 and outs in the middle of the game. And all of a sudden you have this 70-yard touchdown. You just can't figure out what they do well, because it changes within a game. It changes series to series. It changes play to play. They're a very difficult team to pin down in terms of, okay, you can say they do this well, they're struggling here, because offensively, they're running the ball pretty well, but they're not running the ball like they did 6, 7, 8 years ago. I mean, Brian Robinson's a step below what Derrick Henry was, or several step below. Henry and Ingram and Richardson, even Najee Harris. Like, he's been very good, but he's still not what they've had before. Their wide receivers are not what they've had the last couple of years. Their explosive passing game's not what they've had. Bryce Young has been very good, But still, like, he's the Heisman favorite, but you're still not seeing like the Heisman stats necessarily
The
from him.
wow, right.
Right, the wow factor. And we saw a little bit on, the runs that he had in this game and the touchdown runs and all that, but you still feel like they're lacking something each week, but what they're lacking kind of changes. Like the secondary in this past game was a little bit more suspect than it had been against Ole Miss or even Mississippi State. They had, pick six and a couple interceptions in that game. They're a really tough team to figure out. And I think it's they're still probably most likely, almost certainly going to win these final four games. But then you go into the Georgia game potentially in the SEC championship, and you just don't know what you're going to get. And I think that's the biggest problem for this team. Even 8 games into the season, it's almost November. The identity is still not there for him.
Yeah, and I think that that's the one thing Nick Saban impresses upon each team every single year is like establishing that identity, finding that identity. And to me, in recent years, if my memory serves me, the identity of this football team not having been established at this point in the season is a bit of an anomaly for Alabama, and definitely a different situation than we're accustomed to seeing from them. And so, again, I think that does have people where there's the confidence factor, but then also as we tail into the back end of the season, Alabama still has a lot left on the board, a lot of competition that they're going to have to go up against. And of course, we can always circle that last one in the regular season on the calendar, and they got to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium. So, and right now Auburn is playing pretty good football, and coming off a pretty substantial win over Arkansas, and Auburn's still got a long ways to go as well in terms of some of their competition, but inconsistency can certainly be the Achilles heel of this team, and that's certainly something that you would imagine and hope that this Alabama team can work on and clean up during the bye week. Before I let you go, I did want to ask you about Agiye Hall, the freshman, not seen suited up, dressed out on Saturday, and someone in the media decided to ask him about that, and I guess you got a interesting response there from Coach Saban. So, what's the latest on Agiye Hall?
Yeah, so a player who I think really made a name for himself in the spring with the spring game, and that's as it is. It's nationally televised. It's on ESPN. You have Nick Saban down on the field talking to Kirk Herbstreit during the game, and Agiye Hall's making some pretty impressive acrobatic catches, and Nick Saban was really talking up the ability of Agiye Hall and what he could offer to the team. Even Bill O'Brien had spoken to the broadcast team in that game and had a pretty glowing review of what his spring was like. So people started to know his name, and people started to expect certain things out of him, even potentially as a freshman. And obviously that hasn't happened. He caught one pass in the season opener, and his playing time really dwindled to the point where the Mississippi State game, even though it was a blowout, even though other freshmen like Ja'Cory Brooks were getting in the game, Agiye Hall really didn't get a chance. And then he had the tweet afterwards where it was a little bit cryptic, but essentially made it sound like he was frustrated with his playing time. And then you go into this game against Tennessee, who they just played this weekend, and Agiye Hall's not even dressed. So that's what prompted the question after the game. And Nick Saban was irritated, not entirely sure why. I mean, it seems like, again, we all know why Agiye Hall is a story because of the spring and the top 50 prospect and all that, and wanting to know essentially why he wasn't out there. And Nick Saban said, essentially, it's none of our business, that they're trying to get players to do the right things. So pretty clear what the situation is. There's obviously some disconnect there. And again, I'm not sure why Nick Saban answered it the way he did, but that's kind of where Agiye Hall stands. And look, I mean, he went to 4 different high schools. So if he transfers, there is some history of him kind of looking around for other opportunities elsewhere in his career. So I wouldn't rule that out, that possibility. And that's just the reality of college football. You can look in his own position room and see a guy like Jameson Williams, who wasn't getting playing time at Ohio State, is able to play right away now with the NCAA's new rules, go to Alabama, and look what he's done this year. So that's kind of the new reality of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, we're seeing that across the board. I've covered several different teams this year, and, the Big 10, the Big 12, different conferences, all over the country. And, that seems to be, something that some coaches are certainly taking advantage of, and other coaches are, certainly kind of down on the transfer portal and just the idea that, kids can so quickly just, you know what, this isn't working out. And then, a lot of these kids sometimes transfer and think they're going to have an opportunity. Now, Jamison Williams, obviously things have worked out well for him, but that's not the case. And then sometimes these kids go elsewhere and they end up spending more time moving around and not really getting their ingrained in a program. And certainly, it just kind of, I think coaches worry about it kind of being that give up mentality. Okay, this isn't working for me, I'm just going to move on. But, we've seen guys that have stuck with it. Mac Jones, perfect example, a guy that sticks with it ends up being, national championship winning quarterback. And, now he's playing for the Patriots and doing pretty well for himself. I think that's something that Nick Saban tries to impress upon these kids, especially at Alabama. And one thing, and I covered that spring game, and I remember him talking about specifically saying how a lot of these guys as players, they're not, you get 5-star recruits, they're not used to sitting on the bench. They never have had to from the time they playing Pop Warner football back when they were 5-6 years old. So they're not used to having to sit and wait their turn. And so in some ways, they're, you're kind of having to coach that and teach them that and get them through that and some of those growing pains to see that, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that if you continue to work hard and do the right things in practice, but also off the field, it will pay off. And so I certainly think that's, a big key and a good, a big piece of that. We appreciate the insight. Alabama bye week. Of course, this is the bye week. Nick Saban's birthday is coming up. He'll be celebrating, I think, the big 70, won't he? Won't it be 70? So,
true.
Yeah, Nick Saban will be hitting the 7th floor, man. 7th floor for Nick Saban. Hopefully he'll get to celebrate. So we'll wish Nick Saban a happy early birthday for him. He is a Halloween birthday. So we wish Nick Saban a happy early 70th birthday. Hope he gets to celebrate, decompress a little, have a little fun with that. Then after that, it'll be LSU at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And then they'll close things out with New Mexico State and Arkansas at Bryant-Denny, and then they go on the road for final rendezvous with old Auburn. The Auburn Tigers will be on the road. So looking forward to that. Certainly been a fun season so far and still lots to be played out and lots to be figured out. So thank you, Mike. Appreciate your insight as always. And we thank you all for watching. And we thank our sponsors. Keep Alabama beautiful. Everyone have a wonderful and